Well, welcome back to another edition of 42nd Street Pete's Grindhouse, and how about a little more late night noir with some crime films? I love Tubi because I've been banging through some of this stuff. It's like not really readily available anywhere else, and I've come up with some gems. The Mob from 1951, starring Broderick Crawford as, what the hell was he playing? Johnny Domenico. A cop who basically screws something up and is demoted and then has to go undercover to bust a bunch of union organizers here. And one of the main culprits in this movie is an early appearance by Ernest Borgnine in a pretty good role as Joe Castro. Interesting observation after doing the whole character actor thing and the heavies thing and stuff like that. A lot of these guys were cast in different nationalities, and sometimes it made some sense, sometimes it made very little sense. But Ernest Borgnine's first film was China Kosar, and he was cast as Hugh Chang, obviously a Chinaman. But here he's like one of these mob fixers, and one of his henchmen is Neville Brand as Gunner, and they're trying to bring this whole thing down. And the interesting thing is, there are a few people uncredited that show up for a couple of quick lines. And one of them's during the strike, and Charles Bronson is standing there uncredited, saying how unfair this is. And the other one is Frank DeCova, who has words with the Broderick Crawford character about, something about, this whole mob thing sucks or whatever. And he's knocked off later on, and Crawford's character is blamed for it. Interestingly enough, Charles Bronson and Frank DeCova, aside from here, appeared together, co-starred, 4 times that I can remember. They were both cast as Indians in Run of the Arrow, and they were both dressed in loincloths and riding horses, and Bronson was always pretty buff, and Frank really fucking surprised me too. He was pretty buff. Then it was Machine Gun Kelly, where they co-starred as, Frank was the gas station attendant with the crippled arm, and the Stone Killer going into the 70s. So, and, Bronson was cast as a lot of different nationalities, too. He's Eastern European, but he's been cast as a Mexican. He was cast as basically a moron. His only horror film was House of Wax. And trying to think what else he was cast as. I don't know, it's interesting, but Frank DeCova sort of was typecast because he played an Indian renegade in Day of the Outlaw, and then wound up on TV for a couple of years as Chief Wild Eagle in F Troop. So The Mob, definitely worth checking out. And then we segue down to another one called Crime Wave. And Crime Wave was basically a prison breakout and a gas station holdup that opened it up. And a young Dub Taylor is the gas station attendant. The breakouts are, Doc, played by Ted De Corsia, and Ben, played by Charles Bronson, in his first credited role as Charles Buchinsky. And another guy named Gat, who gets shot during the gas station holdup and runs out to find this guy, an old cellmate named Steve, who is straightened out, but is being harassed by this Detective Sims, played by chain-smoking Sterling Hayden. So, eventually, the wounded guy finds his way to Steve's apartment and dies, and a crooked doctor comes in and takes the money. And, of course, this leads the cops to the apartment, and also leads Doc and Ben to the apartment, who tells Steve that, guess what, you're going to be involved in a bank robbery. So, somehow this whole thing is thwarted, but not until there are direct threats made by Ted De Corsia to Steve's wife, and they do hit the bank, and Doc is shot and lying bleeding. Ben runs away in his shotgun from behind, and basically it ends on an upbeat note because Steve and his wife are just let go by Detective Sims. There's also another weird thing in here that toward the end there's a character named Johnny shows up who's an uncredited Timothy Carey who acts sufficiently weird and sleazy as he's guarding the wife. Ironically, Bronson would be gunning down the exact same characters that he started out playing 20 years after this film. So, yeah, there's a lot of different stuff out there, and it's weird how, you know, sometimes art wanders into life, because Ernest Borgnine played Fatso Judson in From Here to Eternity, and he beat Frank Sinatra to death. And in his autobiography, Ernie, he tells a story about how he went to eat, you know, in Little Italy in New York, and as he left the restaurant, he was sort of surrounded by a bunch of guys who were kind of pissed that he killed Frank and were probably going to lay a beating on Ernie, until Ernie tried to explain to them that he is really an Italian guy, Borgnini, I believe his real name is, and that him and Frank were buddies, and it was really, you know, it's a movie, that's it. And that sort of calmed most of them down. A couple still wanted little things, but you know something? You don't fuck with any Italian of a major name and think you're going to get away with it. When Larry Zabisco did the whole turn with Bruno Sammartino, about 2 hours after that aired on TV, he got a call from a policeman friend in New York telling him, whatever you do not ever go back to Little Italy. So yeah, people bought it then, but it's just interesting how early on in a lot of these guys' careers, they played people of other nationalities. Like you take Frank Silvera, for instance. He was a Jamaican who played Mexicans and Italian gangsters. So, yeah, maybe I'll do a whole show on that. I'll call it, What Nationality Are You Anyway? Which might be interesting. So, that's our show for today. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for tuning in. And above all, stay safe. And we'll catch you on the flip side.